The world sees Coco Gauff as the youngest star in tennis who somehow always sounds like the wisest person in the room. A two-time Grand Slam champion before her 22nd birthday. Poised, articulate, unshakable. At least, that's what the cameras want you to believe. But behind that composure is a teenager who once sobbed into a towel mid-match at Arthur Ashe Stadium. A young woman who has cried after losing finals, first-round upsets, and matches she should have won. A daughter who watched her own little brother break down in tears in the stands after one of the biggest losses of her life. And in the summer of 2026, on the grass courts of Wimbledon, one single shot, a drop shot that never even cleared the net, reduced the calmest voice in tennis to a devastated question she couldn't stop asking herself. How does someone carry the weight of being the next great American champion, while still being allowed to fall apart in front of millions of people and get back up again? If Coco Gauff's story has ever moved you, leave a like before we dive in. This one's for her. Coco Gauff was born on March 13, 2004, in Atlanta, Georgia, and raised in Delray Beach, Florida, into a family where competition wasn't just encouraged, it was inherited. Her father, Coco Gauff, had played basketball at Georgia State. Her mother, Candy Gauff, was a heptathlete and track athlete at Florida State. Athleticism ran through the family like a second bloodline, and by the time Coco could walk, a racket had already found its way into her hands. But it was her grandmother, Yvonne Odom, who quietly shaped something deeper than athletic talent. Yvonne had been the first black student to integrate her high school in Delray Beach back in the 1960s, a piece of family history that Coco has spoken about with visible pride, a reminder that resilience wasn't something she needed to invent. It was already running in her blood, decades before she ever picked up a racket. Coco's father eventually gave up his own career ambitions to fully dedicate himself to coaching his daughter, moving the family, restructuring their entire life around a dream that had no guarantee attached to it. By the time she was still in single digits, Coco wasn't just playing tennis. She was being raised inside a family built entirely around the belief that she could become something extraordinary. The pressure of that belief would follow her onto the biggest stages in the world before she'd even become a teenager. Coco turned professional at just 14 years old, an age when most kids are still worrying about middle school homework. She trained relentlessly, sacrificing a conventional childhood for early mornings on the court and a level of scrutiny most adults never have to face. Tennis academies, junior tournaments, and an unforgiving development pathway defined her adolescence. The pressure only intensified as comparisons began almost immediately to Venus and Serena Williams, to the idea of the next great American star. It's a label that can crush a young athlete before they've even had the chance to define themselves on their own terms. Coco was entering a WTA landscape stacked with dominant rivals in waiting. Iga Swiatek, Aryna Sabalenka, Naomi Osaka, players who would go on to define an entire era of women's tennis alongside her. She had one advantage most of them didn't have yet. The entire tennis world was already watching her, years before she'd proven anything at the top level. And in July of 2019, at the age of 15, that spotlight was about to become impossible to escape. Wimbledon, July 1st, 2019. Court 1. A 15-year-old Coco Gauff, having just qualified for her first ever Grand Slam main draw, walked out to face childhood idol Venus Williams, a 5-time Wimbledon champion, and someone Coco had grown up idolizing on her bedroom wall. Nobody expected a teenager fresh out of qualifying to compete with a legend of Venus's caliber. But Gauff played with a fearlessness that stunned the tennis world, dismantling Venus in straight sets, 6-4, 6-4. When the match ended, Coco didn't celebrate like a star. She dropped to the grass, visibly emotional, then walked to the net and embraced Venus, the same player whose posters had lined her childhood bedroom. In the post-match interview, still catching her breath, she said something that would define the way the world saw her for years to come. That Venus had been the reason she started playing tennis in the first place, and that facing her on that court felt like a dream she never expected to actually live. Overnight, Coco Gauff wasn't just a name in youth tennis circles. It was a headline across the entire sporting world. She wasn't just the youngest player to qualify for Wimbledon in the tournament's modern history. She had become the face of tennis's future, at 15 years old, with a lifetime of pressure now attached to her name. What followed was one of the most closely watched rises in modern tennis. In September 2023, at the U.S. Open, a 19-year-old Gauff claimed her first Grand Slam singles title, coming back from a set down to defeat world number 1 Aryna Sabalenka in front of a roaring home crowd at Arthur Ashe Stadium. It was a full-circle moment, the same court where, years earlier, she had once broken down in tears. Then, in June 2025, she added a second major title at the French Open, defeating Sabalenka once again in a gripping 3-set final on the clay of Roland Garros, proving her breakthrough wasn't a fluke, but the foundation of a genuine championship-level career. Along the way, she became one of the faces of a golden era in women's tennis, locked in an ongoing rivalry with Swiatek and Sabalenka that many analysts now compare to the sport's greatest generational battles. Off the court, Gauff became known for something rarer than talent: composure. Interview after interview, she spoke with a maturity that felt decades beyond her age, using her platform to speak on social justice, mental health, and what it actually feels like to grow up under a magnifying glass. But greatness at the top of tennis doesn't stay comfortable for long. As Gauff climbed the rankings, the margins for error grew smaller, the expectations grew heavier, and cracks that the public rarely saw began quietly forming beneath the poise. Here's what the highlight reels rarely show. Behind Gauff's calm, articulate press conferences was a young woman battling one of the most vulnerable parts of professional tennis: the serve. Double faults crept into her game at the worst possible moments, undermining a player with generational athletic ability. In August 2025, just before the U.S. Open, Gauff made the difficult decision to part ways with coach Brad Gilbert, bringing in biomechanics specialist Gavin McMillan in a last-minute attempt to rebuild her serve technique under the brightest lights in tennis. The pressure of that change became visible in the most human way possible. During her second-round match against Donna Vekic, after being broken at 4-4 in the first set, Gauff sat down during the changeover and sobbed into a towel, a moment captured on live television and shared across the world within minutes. Later, in her press conference, still visibly emotional, she offered a rare glimpse into what life actually feels like behind the trophies. It feels human, I think. Being an athlete, people kind of disregard that side of us, the human side of things. She admitted it had been a tough couple weeks on and off the court. Without elaborating further, a small, guarded window into a private struggle she chose not to fully open to the public. It was proof that the poised, wise beyond her years champion the world had built up in their minds was still, underneath it all, a young woman carrying an enormous weight largely alone. If the U.S. Open tears were a crack in the armor, what happened across the summer of 2026 revealed just how much Gauff had been quietly carrying. In May 2026, at the Italian Open final in Rome, Gauff faced Alina Svitolina and lost for the second consecutive year at that same final hurdle for 6, 7-6, 3, 2-6. In the deciding set, visibly rattled, she smashed her head with her racket in frustration before nearly breaking down in tears on court. It capped a season defined, by her own admission, by near misses and inconsistent form. A title-less year that stood in sharp contrast to her championship breakthroughs of years prior. Then came Wimbledon. July 5, 2026. Gauff, seeded 7th, had fought her way into the semifinals against Karolina Muchova, chasing a place in the final that would have completed her career Grand Slam surface sweep, and made her the first American woman to reach a Wimbledon final since Serena Williams in 2016. The match stretched into a deciding set tiebreak. At 9-8, Gauff earned a match point. She landed a strong first serve. Muchova's return fell short, an opening most players dream of. Instead of finishing with a routine winner, Gauff chose an ambitious drop shot. It clipped the net. The crowd gasped. The chance was gone. Muchova leveled the score, then closed out the tiebreak to win 6-2, 1-6, 7-6, 10, ending Gauff's tournament in the cruelest possible way. Afterward, in a raw and unguarded press conference, Gauff didn't hide behind composure this time. She simply said, "I just panicked." 2 words. No embellishment. No practiced grace. Just a young woman admitting, in front of the entire tennis world, that in the single biggest moment of her season, fear had beaten her before her opponent ever got the chance to. For a player known for saying all the right things, all the mature things, that moment of raw honesty said more about who Coco Gauff really is than any trophy ever could. In the weeks following that Wimbledon defeat, Gauff did what she has done after nearly every heartbreak in her career. She kept playing, kept showing up, kept trying to reset. At 22 years old, she remains one of the most recognizable and respected figures in tennis, a two-time Grand Slam champion, still building what many believe will be a career defined by even bigger chapters ahead. She continues to use her platform for causes beyond the sport, remains close with her family, including the grandmother whose own quiet courage helped shape her, and has spoken openly, again and again, about the importance of normalizing an athlete's right to simply feel something in public. This story matters right now because Coco Gauff represents something increasingly rare in modern sports. A superstar willing to let the mask slip, publicly, repeatedly, without shame. She isn't chasing the image of perfection anymore. She's chasing something harder. The ability to fall apart in front of millions of people and still walk back onto the court the very next tournament. She was 15 years old when she dropped to her knees on the grass of Wimbledon, overwhelmed by beating the idol she'd once idolized on a bedroom wall. Years later, on that very same grass, she dropped her head in disbelief after a drop shot she'll probably replay in her mind for the rest of her career. Two moments, two kinds of tears, the same young woman standing in between them, still learning how to carry both. Because greatness was never really about never breaking down. It was about being brave enough to let the world see you cry and stepping back onto the court anyway. If Coco Gauff's honesty has ever resonated with you, share your favorite memory of her below. The world is still watching her story unfold.